had been heightened interest in the 1970s, but the 90s sensationalized and glamorized the serial killer like no decade before. It's like stopping and gawking at a car accident. It's literally rubbernecking, and you think, thank God that's not me, said John Waters, director of the 1994 black comedy Serial Mom. In a post-Soviet period of fear about alleged super predators, the threat of feminism, gay culture, and alternative cultures, plus the very real drug and crime problems and a neglected mental health crisis, the serial killer dominated. Serial killers have become what vampires were to Victorian audiences and giant lizards and bugs were to audiences during the height of the Cold War, wrote one columnist. In the same article, one professor named Harold Schechter was quoted as saying, "Every particular era embodies its deepest fears in some archetype of a monster, inventing new clothing for the archetype. The serial killer is our mythic monster. Except serial killers are, and have always been, real." Let's look at media depictions as well as major and overshadowed cases to add even more context to Lectual Does the 90s and I Love the 90s True Crime.
So much freaking research.
In 2009, the FBI updated its definition of serial killer to include people who killed 2 or more people in separate events. But for most people and in media, the serial killer has been someone who murders over 3 people. And in the 90s, such murderers were everywhere. There were the serial killers in new books like Bret Easton Ellis's 1990 tome, American Psycho. The book, by the way, is 1,000,000 times darker than the 2000 film. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, filmed in 1986 but released in 1990, was a polarizing X-rated film that dramatized the lives of Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. Its tagline was, "He's not Freddy, he's not Jason, he's real." That same year, the eerie mystery show Twin Peaks began airing, featuring a serial killer character. One of my favorite movies, 1991's Silence of the Lambs, starring Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster, dropped the same year that the Justice Department estimated there were approximately 100 serial killers nationwide. The film was based on the 1988 novel by Thomas Harris, who took classes at the FBI and consulted with former agents Robert Ressler and John Douglas when creating his infamous character Hannibal Lecter for the 1981 Red Dragon. While forming the Behavioral Analysis Unit in the 70s, Ressler and Douglas first termed serial killer to mean people who killed 3 or more people with periods of cooldowns. Here's a picture of them with Edmund Kemper, a necrophiliac who, after serving 6 years for murdering his own grandparents, got out and went on to kill at least 8 women before 1973. He came to be the archetype of the helpful and intelligent serial killer, who became a model prisoner and told the detectives about his past to contribute to catching other killers. One of John Douglas's most popular lectures was The Silence of the Lambs, Myth and Reality. The Silence of the Lambs made $272 million and became the 5th highest grossing movie worldwide that year. It was the first and only horror film to win the Oscar for Best Picture. In the film, James Buffalo Bill Gum kidnaps women and skins them to make a suit for himself. Buffalo Bill was inspired in part by Ed Gein, who robbed graves and murdered at least 2 women in the 1950s, fashioning their skin into corsets, leggings, and other clothing items. But Buffalo Bill wasn't the star of the film. It was Hannibal Lecter, a high-class, wealthy, intelligent descendant of nobility. Plus, he's a cannibal.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Wrote Roger Ebert when reviewing the film, "One key to the film's appeal is that audiences like Hannibal Lecter. He may be a cannibal, but as a dinner party guest, he would give value for money if he didn't eat you. He does not bore, he likes to amuse. He has his standards, and he is the smartest person in the movie. He bears comparison, indeed, with such other movie monsters like Nosferatu, Frankenstein, King Kong, and Norman Bates." Clarice Starling, the FBI agent, represented a new and soon-to-be popular trope of the hard-boiled yet sensitive female investigator, and the common archetype in crime fiction, the ruthless cop who had the power of profiling to catch bad guys. Cops were the focal point of most serial killer media in the 90s. Explained David Smid, "If audiences were inclined to feel guilty about their interest in serial murder, The mass media reassured them that being fascinated by serial killers was acceptable because in the process of consuming serial killer pop culture, they learned about psychology and law enforcement procedure while also participating vicariously in the apprehension and conviction of these criminals. This implied that the evil of mass murderers could be prevented, predicted, and controlled. Except, what about when it couldn't? What about when the justice system lets the most dangerous people slip through the cracks? 1991 was marked by a real cannibalistic serial killer as well. Between 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer killed 17 boys and men, 16 of them in Milwaukee, 1 in Ohio. Most of them were minorities, and 9 of them were black. It didn't have to be this way. In 1989, the pedophilic cannibal pled guilty to sexually assaulting a 13-year-old boy in Ohio. Instead of being sent to prison for the rest of his life, ludicrously, he was released until sentencing and murdered his 5th victim, a 24-year-old named Anthony Sears. Nobody knew this when he was being sentenced for the sexual assault of a child. His father, Lionel, begged the court to give his son a maximum sentence and treatment. Instead, he got 5 years probation and 1 year of jail with work release. He went on to kill 12 more people, removing their body parts for consumption and display, and dissolving other body parts in a 57-gallon drum filled with acid. One of his victims included a 14-year-old named Conarak Synthesymphone, who had managed to escape in May 1991. A black woman named Glenda Cleveland and her daughter and niece were totally dismissed by police when they tried to help the boy. Ignoring the black women insisting that Conarak was bleeding, hurt, and a child, they did a quick glance in Dahmer's stinky apartment and left him in his care.
As she insisted the person being beaten was a child.
When I say what I have to say and I know it to be true, I don't feel that I have to constantly keep repeating myself. And I think that can be said for everyone.
Glenda Cleveland recognized Conarak's photo in a missing persons report a few days later, and she called the FBI. Nothing happened, and Dahmer killed another 4 people after he killed Conarak.
Did you start to doubt yourself?
I must admit I did. I did.
But do you feel they let that boy down that night?
Yes, they did. Yes. Yes, he was definitely let down. He was let down as low as he could get. And that was to his grave. You can't get much lower than that.
This was indicative of a larger problem nationwide, but especially in Milwaukee, which was plagued by police indifference and economic hardship for black residents. Dahmer's last victim, Tracy Edwards, agreed to go back to his apartment on July 21st, 1992. Using his typical MO, Dahmer drugged and threatened Tracy and told him he was going to eat his heart. Edwards stayed calm and placated Dahmer to the point that he could escape. He flagged down cops, who then arrested Dahmer after looking around his apartment and finding photos of body parts and the severed head of a black man, Oliver Joseph Lacey, in the refrigerator. The revelations about Jeffrey Dahmer and the lack of police investigation into missing minority boys and men shook the city of Milwaukee. At the time, it was hyper-segregated and black residents were desperate for economic relief and changes. The apartment building where Dahmer committed his crimes was destroyed on November 17, 1992, and supporters of his victims held protests against the police. Despite Dahmer's cannibalism and perverse crimes, he quickly racked up fans and adulation. Not only was he forthcoming and open about his crimes, but he pretended to be repentant. His privilege as a white man netted empathy from people who thought, that could be my son, my brother, my father. While serving out his 16 life sentences, he received fan mail and at least $12,000, including coins from a 74-year-old nun and an anonymous London woman who sent nearly $6,000. In 1992, the popular TV movie To Catch a Killer debuted, featuring a dramatization of the life of John Wayne Gacy, who killed 31 teen boys and men near Chicago, Illinois between 1972 and 1978. 2 years after the TV movie, Gacy was executed, and his collection of art, which he had made in prison, was auctioned off by his lawyer, with the money being given to his victims and charities. One 50-year-old man named Joseph Roth bought 21 of the items for $20,000 and torched them. When Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered in prison by a man named Christopher Scarver in 1994, his entire estate was left to 11 of the families of his victims, who decided to auction them off. Not all victims' families were in favor of this auction, nor were many locals. A Milwaukee real estate developer named Joseph Zilber asked how much it would cost to stop the auction and was told $1 million. A civic group organized $407,225 with $100,000 donated by Zilber to buy the stuff and destroy it. Said the relative of one victim, "We're just supposed to sit back and let everybody make money off of Jeffrey Dahmer, and what do we get? We get nothing. I don't care what I have to do. If we don't do it, down the line, someone else is going to be making money off this." And in a country that historically sent lynching postcards, in the 90s there were people making money off of the killer, with trading cards, comic books, and apparel, and eBay listings of crime scene items. Celebritization of killers, long a practice since the days of Jack the Ripper, was satirized in Serial Mom, starring Kathleen Turner and Matthew Lillard, who is a horror movie goat and the best Shaggy we could possibly hope for. In the movie, Kathleen plays Beverly, who after committing a slew of murders for trivial reasons, becomes a nationwide sensation and gets acquitted.
Please stand here, Beverly. Guys, what about a nice two-shot, okay?
No, Suzanne, really,
no,
I do
Beverly, stand right here. Okay, smile, Serial Mom.
Suzanne Summers, this is my bad side.
Also in 1994, Bruce Lee's son Brandon portrayed a vigilante-style paranormal serial killer in The Crow, and he was shot and killed by a prop gun before the movie was completed. The same year, Natural Born Killers also satirized the American media response to mass murderers. The polarizing film would be the alleged inspiration for multiple copycat crimes in the years to come, and teen killers and terrorists Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris referred to their 1999 plans for Columbine High School as going in BK. The next film to evolve the serial killer genre was the extremely gritty Seven, one of my favorites, starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman. To modern audiences, nothing in the movie is truly outrageous because many of us are desensitized and we've become accustomed to more gore. But in 1995, the David Fincher directed film was considered to be too macabre, sinister, and evil. Denzel Washington even turned down the role played by Brad Pitt because he thought the script was too evil, a decision he came to regret. And I'm actually mad at him because we could have had like a black-led horror serial killer movie in 1995. Screenwriter Andrew Kevin Walker was inspired to write the film while living in New York. There's lots of evil out there, and you're not always going to get the satisfaction of having any sort of understanding of why that is. That's one of the things that scares people the most about serial killers, he said. The year that Seven debuted, John Douglas published Mindhunter, inside the FBI's elite serial crime unit. And it makes perfect sense that David Fincher, also director of 2007 Zodiac, based on the crimes of the Zodiac Killer, would be an executive producer on the 2017 adaptation of Mindhunter for Netflix. In Seven, the killer, John Doe, chooses his victims based on the 7 deadly sins. The movie's plot twist climax almost didn't get made, with executives believing it would piss off audiences. The movie would rack up $320 million worldwide and change the trajectory of crime thrillers by encouraging darker topics, more gore, and faith-based horror. Similar films would follow, including Kiss the Girls and the regretful Denzel Washington in Fallen and the Bone Collector. Andrew Kevin Walker would also adapt 1999's Sleepy Hollow into a screenplay, featuring the investigation of a paranormal serial killer in 1799. So in 1996, it was reported that Doreen Leoy, an editor for Tiger Beat magazine, who helped actor John Stamos become famous, was just one of several women who had tried to win over Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, a man who had killed over 15 people. With over 75 letters and multiple phone calls and visits, she won her prize and married him in a prison ceremony. She said, "I just believe in him completely. In my opinion, there was far more evidence to convict O.J. Simpson, and we all know how that turned out." Doreen was just one of many serial killer groupies. Another was Sandra London, whose 1997 AOL website, Serial Killers Talk to Sandra London, was briefly removed after a threat of boycott. The internet made it easier for these people to connect with each other and gush over their favorite killers.
Like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters?
Screenwriter Kevin Williamson was inspired by Danny Rawling, who murdered 5 Florida college students in August 1990 and 3 others in Shreveport, Louisiana. Rawling would claim to want Ted Bundy-style fame, invoking the name of the murderer with over 30 victims, who had met the electric chair in January 1989. Rowling would collaborate on a book with Sandra London, and they were engaged for a short period of time. So Williamson created Scream, which had commentary on the media, represented by Courtney Cox as the ruthless Gale Weathers, and satire of slasher films, which had gone critically stale in the 80s and first half of the 90s.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes. It was fun.
It was well received, though releasing at Christmas time in 1996 with low expectations of box office success. The film eventually earned $173 million worldwide, spawning an entire series. Kevin Williamson went on to write other teen horror flicks like The Faculty and I Know What You Did Last Summer, which similarly explored themes of mortality, innocence, and suburbia. These types of films would take on a new resonance in the aftermath of Columbine, which we dive into in episode 4 of Lectual Does the 90s. Wrote Amy Tobin, unlike urban action pictures, which imply, with rare exceptions, that the threat to America is ghettoized, that it can be policed and locked away as long as the invading third world hordes are kept at bay, serial killer films are set in white neighborhoods, suburbia, the farm belt, the backwoods. The serial killer is a marauder. He might turn up anywhere, and in fact, almost all serial killers are white males who kill within their own racial group. Bred in the heartlands, he's the deformed version of the American dream of the individual. While serial killer culture thrived in the 90s, preconceptions about them and their victims meant more danger for non-white people. In I Love the 90s True Crime, we discussed the serial murders of Henry Louis Wallace, who terrorized my hometown between 1992 and 1994. Charlotte police were told by the FBI that the killings weren't serial, and that serial killers didn't kill people they knew. The murders of 7 white women by Derek Todd Lee from 1993 until 2000 were profiled to be done by a white man. In addition to the flaws of profiling, non-white men were committing serial murder. Jerome Dennis raped and killed 5 women and girls in New Jersey between 1991 and 1992. Benjamin Atkins murdered 11 women, mostly sex workers and homeless women, around Detroit between 1991 and 1992. James Swan killed 4 people and injured 5 others in a series of random drive-by shootings between February and April 1993. Andre Crawford, a necrophile, killed 11 women between 1993 and 1999 in Chicago, before finally being caught in 2000. And believe me, there are more, like the most prolific serial killer, Samuel Little, who killed approximately 100 women between 1970 and 2005. But this is a quickie that's already running long. There were Latino serial killers like Altemio Sanchez, Ramon Torres Hernandez, and Francisco Del Junco. Asian serial killers included Sebastian Shaw, Harnoko Dewantono, and Andrew Cunanan, whose final victim was the mega designer Gianni Versace. Another type of serial killer who had long been under the radar until the 90s was the female serial killer, best embodied by Eileen Wuornos. But overwhelmingly, the cunning and elusive serial killer was mostly characterized as an intelligent and charming white man, a la Hannibal Lecter. And when the victims weren't white, people hardly seemed to care. And the FBI profiling mantra that most serial killers kill within their own race is flawed. In Louisiana, the so-called Storyville Slayer killed 24 mostly black women and girls between 1991 and 1996. One man, Russell Elwood, who bragged in a previous prison stint about committing the killings, was convicted of killing 1, but not the others. The murders stopped when he went to prison, but the rest of the murders have never been investigated or solved. On August 13, 1997, an anonymous caller to the Howard Stern show called himself Clay and gave details on 12 of the murders. Hoax or not, the show's tapes were confiscated by the FBI. Another interracial crime serial killer was Ronald Joseph Dominique, who killed 23 men and boys in Louisiana between 1997 and 2006. He had previously been arrested for rape and attempted murder, and once punched a woman in the face. 15 of his 23 victims were black men. By the time of the Bayou Stranglers' arrest, the attention paid to real-life serial killers had diminished. They were no longer the big bad boogeyman in a post-9/11 society. They still aroused interest, especially the ones who had become household names, but they didn't garner 1990s levels of attention. While serial killers are regularly depicted in police procedurals like Criminal Minds, most neatly captured by the end of the hour thanks to handy profiles and law enforcement competence, there have been less of them in real life, where competence isn't guaranteed. Why have serial killings gone down? For starters, there's less lead exposure, which has been linked to violent crime. The authors of Freakonomics propose that the availability of birth control and abortion from the 1970s onward, along with other factors, led to less killers. Summed up Philip Martin, 72 murders were attributed to serial killers in the 50s. This number practically tripled in the 60s to 217, and nearly tripled again in the 70s, 605. In the 80s, 768 murders were attributed to serial killers. In the 90s, 669. That declined to 371 in the years 2000 and 2009, and to 117 since 2010. Those numbers are still high as hell, if you ask me. Plus, only a little more than half of America's murders are solved every year. As abortion rights and birth control access are on the decline, will there be more neglected and/or abused children growing up into unhappy and vengeful adults? As it stands, approximately 1% of all U.S. murders are serial. Considering 500,000 people are missing at any time in this country, and undocumented immigrants and marginalized people exist, plus what we know about police incompetency, will retrospectives in the future reveal new truths about modern serial killings? Despite being just 1% of all of America's murders, America has more serial killers than any nation on earth. However, that's not just ritualistic killers like Dennis Rader or Samuel Little, but that also includes hitmen, drug dealers, and gang members doing multiple drive-bys. And unsurprisingly, this has changed serial killer data. Wrote forensic psychologist Eric Hickey, based upon the FBI definition of 2 killings making a serial killer, between 2004 and 2014, controlling for race and gender, 50% of all male serial killers in the United States were African American. Additionally, will we ever know how many people in the military or police department are scratching their serial killer itches without punishment and not being included in the total tally? Will this change in the future? Will there be data about the number of serial killers who intentionally change their MO and signatures because of years of police procedurals and fictional investigations making them wiser? In the present day, only 8.6% of all known U.S. serial killers are female, with 70% acting for financial reasons, compared to only 28.8% of male serial killers who are motivated by money. And I'm not just curious about gender, but race too. 82% of documented American serial killers are white, and 15% are black. And not all of them stick within their racial groups or present as mentally ill. 70% of known serial killer victims are female, reflecting a deeply entrenched misogyny. As the gender binary disappears and racial groups continue to blur, and whites become a minority, what will change about serial killers, their victims, and the people who profile them? Only time will tell. That's it for this quickie. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more 90s content, make sure you subscribe to the Intellectual Media channel and check out Lectual Does the 90s.